It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Erwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Erwin, I like the
I know
nightlife. I like to boogie.
I know you've been waiting. I know you've been waiting for this for a very long time. And this is probably whatever our 53rd episode podcast, incredibly enough. But I hope I'm not overstepping here, Esperanza, but would you like to dance with me?
Mais oui. I keep bringing that French in because I think it's hilarious that you love it so much.
Now for those of you out there who are loyal listeners and followers to Our Hamptons podcast, Esperanza Leon has been lamenting the lack of dancing on Eastern Long Island for really almost from the beginning of Our Hamptons podcast, Esperanza. This has been
it's a theme for me.
This has been a recurring theme of yours. So, in the effort to be, a good podcast co-host with Esperanza, we're going to go back to the disco era, Saturday Night Fever, one of my all-time favorite movies, I might add.
Yeah, which actually was like the tail end of the disco
Exactly.
era, wasn't it?
I think
it was almost like disco was almost dead when that movie
I think
came
it was
out.
from 77, 79, whatever. But
totally my time. I mean, totally
right.
my time.
I love
like Funky Town time.
I another great song, another great. And by the way, I disco music. I realized there were things like, the Cleveland or Chicago baseball stadium did a disco demolition night where it turned into a riot where they were burning and stamping.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But I got to tell you, okay, late 70s, I was 20, 21 years old. I loved that music at the time. It really was.
Yeah, got you on your feet.
It really did. There was something to it.
It was a little cheesy at times, right?
Okay,
but still.
No, but I got to tell you, it did resurrect the Bee Gees' career.
Yeah. So no doubt.
That's a podcast for a music station, which we are. But we do want to touch on how the disco era on Eastern Long Island really was something, especially at the Mellow Mouth. And I got to tell you, Esperanza and I were talking about this at the beginning of this episode, how there's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of things to get to. The Mellow Mouth is in 44 Three Mile Harbor Road, a building that goes back to really the early 20th century, Esperanza.
Yeah.
It's had a history unto itself. We were even saying this could be like we did an episode on number 1 Main Street. We could do an episode just on the history of this building, which we're going to try to tie in, but got to give credit to a July 2023 article from East Magazine, publication of the East Hampton Star. Big shout out to Stephanie Krikorian, who wrote this article.
Yes.
I don't remember reading it last year, incredibly.
Oh, I did. And I am sure that Bess Rattray had a lot to do with it getting done, because this has been a theme for her.
It has been. She's very interested, with her project, the Anchor Society, to to create a general store or something. Hey, Bess, how about a disco?
Yes.
Right? What do you think? We can lobby for that, Esperanza?
Maybe no, we can't do that. I was going to say maybe in the current senior center, which was a bar.
That's all that, which is definitely a conversation for another day. But we got to start with the Mellow Mouth. Now, in this, 1970s, we're going over this article, talks about a DJ, Preston Powell, packing 300 disco records. Remember at the time,
vinyl,
wasn't electronic at the time.
No.
This guy was literally 300 records, 200 pounds of equipment, bringing it from his apartment in New York to East Hampton. Susan Leonard was one of the owners of this club at 44 Three Mile Harbor Road, the Mellow Mouth. She'd pick him up, and DJ goes on to say how the energy was amazing. He couldn't wait to get there. It was the height of disco, and well, there was a lot less traffic in 27 in those days. I like the quote, Esperanza. The Hamptons was already a shorthand for wealth and privilege, a playground for the moneyed set.
Yeah, well, I think we've covered this. It's been that since God, the
Yes.
20s, the 30s in some ways,
It,
it's
it,
not something we haven't read before.
and it is nothing new, but I like the way they bring out in this article how, and this is, you've sort of inferred this on a number of occasions, Esperanza, unlike how it is today, patrons then weren't about posting about their night on Instagram or about the
Yeah.
brand, right?
No, no, no. I mean, this predates that so much, but this was a place where people would come to just escape,
Yes,
really escape, be low key, not be seen, just
exactly.
be themselves, have fun, enjoy. Yeah.
Right. It was just to have fun. And now, Esperanza, this is real. And again, this is these things you could have written this article because you brought these points out so many times how most people under the age of 40 today were really not all that aware of how wild and varied the nightlife was out here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because we're all suspicious, after you turn 30, you're not trustworthy, and we're probably lying. Anything that comes out of our mouths, our generation.
And
We didn't have fun. Nothing
no,
happened in the 80s.
no, and we're certainly not having
As
fun now. But
as my sister told me one time, she's
okay,
10 years younger than me almost.
exactly. Yeah, well, very
Nothing happened in the 80s.
very untrusting, that younger generation,
Yeah. Yeah.
Esperanza. But and again, this article goes on to talk about, and these are themes we've covered on East Hampton. How there was a gay club scene in Wainscott, dating even before Club Swamp, dating back to the 40s, and again, how in the 70s and 80s there was Danceteria, there was Martell's, Oceans, which even I remember.
Le Mans.
Um,
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
you know, but
Le
the
Mans the
Mellow Mouth,
coolest.
yeah, yeah. But the Mellow Mouth was really, it was different. And again, she goes on in this article to discuss how there wasn't the $1,000 bottle service that there is today. You could just walk in the door with $10 and just go in there and dance.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I would say, and not knowing, I never frequented the Mellow Mouth, but just thinking, like, if I think of Le Mans, Danceteria, they were like, there was a hype around them, right?
Right.
And Mellow Mouth seems to me like it was more, I don't know, what would you call it? Democratic. It was just kind of what we were saying, low key vibe, nothing too pretentious.
Exactly. Exactly. And we have to also bring up, I'm going to segue into a fact of how, again, this is teenagers even at the time.
I know. This is the part I love. Yeah.
Okay. Right. I mean, like there
Granted,
was,
it was, 18 was the cutoff, the drinking age, right? You could
right.
you could legally drink at 18, but by what was it, changed in the 1982, 1984, something like that.
Something like that. But, and to segue away from this East article for a minute, there was a 1979 article I found in the New York Times
Mm-hmm.
all about teen discos. And at the time, there was a show, a project of the East Hampton High School television department, and it was at Mellow Mouth, and it was called Bonac Bandstand. And
I
it
love
was,
that.
obvious play on great old show from ran for I don't know how many years, American Bandstand. Dick Clark, all of these teenagers dancing, very cool thing. But Mellow Mouth ran a teen disco Tuesday nights in the summer. Um, and it goes on in this article. I'm just going to touch on this for a moment. Scott Rubenstein was the club's promotion director at the time. I don't know Scott personally, but I know his name. He owns the clubhouse in Wainscott, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
right, Esperanza?
Yep. Yep. He was
And
19 at the time,
he was
so it's
19 at the time.
amazing.
So this is going back. Sorry to give you your age away, Scott, but it's public knowledge, I guess.
Yeah, it's public info.
But and Scott is talking about how it's not a disco town, East Hampton, it's a rock and roll town, and it was a Saturday Night Fever kind of vibe in here. And Scott goes on to say how these kids were the children of carpenters, fishermen, and plumbers. But on Friday night, like Saturday Night Fever, they got decked out in their disco outfits. This is
I love it. I
coolest
just
story.
what an image that gives us.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the story is going back 79. So we're talking, God, 45 years, Esperanza.
Mm.
Um, and he goes on to say how on Friday nights, 300 teenagers, $3 admission, went in there. The Mellow Mouth covered all the liquor bottles. So there was no drinking, there was no drug problems, nothing like that. So
Yeah. I mean, I wish there were. Come on, Scott. Are you doing this at Clubhouse?
he might be, but
Yeah, yeah, no, but I think
I
it's
don't know.
such an
But
outlet. Although I guess I just really do think teens don't dance anymore.
I,
It's socially awkward.
look, we've all seen these images, of young people, teens being together, and they're together looking at their phones. Whatever. I
It's
don't want to.
yeah, yeah.
I
We're
don't
not
want to set.
gonna,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
and
don't
we're
want to
not
check.
gonna dwell on that.
Yeah, Esperanza, please don't let me channel my inner Larry David, who I've been accused of. Irwin, you got to stop with the yeah. The curmudgeon with the no filter. I got to
I'm with you
relate.
on
So
it though.
please,
Yeah, yeah.
hey, Esperanza, will you rein me in, please?
Well, let's get back to the
Okay,
Mellow
we're going to
Mouth
get back. So again, talking about this,
or
yeah,
continue.
exactly. Again, going back to this East article, and there was a young woman who quoted in this article how they would go there, and it was Diana Ross, Gloria Gaynor, The Village People, Chic. Oh God, I remember these songs like they
Oh
were
yeah.
yesterday. Donna Summer, and how she relays all the girls would dance in a circle, and if MacArthur Park, I remember the Donna Summer remake of MacArthur Park. We'd come on and we'd act out the slow part.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh
it's
my
terrific.
God,
Good
it was,
times. Good times.
it was, and in a way, like she goes on to say how it was almost they were trying to emulate this little slice of what was happening at Studio 54, which again was at that time.
Active. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, again, no drinking. There was none of that. I mean, inhibitions were sort of put to the side. And again, she goes on, and it was before, this is Claire Lieben was quoted in here. She was 18 at the time, was working as a cocktail waitress at the Mellow Mouth for $4 an hour. And she was saying, there was the women's movement. Well, there was apparently, she describes a lot of sex, lots of drugs, even though contradicts what some of these other people were saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the rest of the crowd that would go, not
Yeah,
the teen nights, obviously.
right. And right, exactly. Thank you for the correct, yeah, well, this was more, the adult scene in there.
Right. And this is pre-AIDS, it was
Right.
just another time of
Different.
we'll
Yeah.
talk about no inhibition. Yeah.
Correct. And she goes on again, and this is talk about an Our Hamptons podcast theme. Again, going back to this era, the late 70s, how different it was here. Real stores, a candy store, the musty smelling hardware store with the
Yeah.
toys upstairs.
Yeah.
We've spoken about that. But
Was
again,
just a regular town,
correct.
just
And
regular town, regular people going to this place to
and
dance.
and this is goes on to say how the Mellow Mouth was filled with regular people who could afford to go out. And again, the theme we've spoken of, documented in a zillion different places. By the late 80s and 90s, I like this line she writes here. People with money started coming out complaining about noise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, going on, and we're going to start to get into Esperanza, which I think is really a fascinating part of this story, sort of the history of the building itself.
Yeah.
And before we went on, again, this is a building at 44 Three Mile Harbor Road. We're
Which,
going to
yeah,
tell you,
let me just say, I mean, this is
please.
like, this is as you're sort of is leaving the village of East Hampton. You've exited the village of East Hampton. This is Freetown, basically.
That's correct.
This
Yeah,
area of Freetown, which is an unincorporated part of East Hampton.
that is correct. And it's a building on, we all know this building. It's on the east side of 3 Mile Harbor Road. Again, it's had a lot of different lives, which we'll go over. Um, and we're going to touch on one now after the Mellow Mouth when it became the Jag. Now,
Mm.
Esperanza actually remembers this personally. Remember, Our Hamptons audience, she has seen the sun come up after a night of carousing. I'll never let you live that one. Not that you want to live it down, but it is a thing I like to keep bringing up. Now that opened in '84. Still a little. You were there, I think, a little later. You were
Later, yeah, yeah.
still too
Well,
young for
this,
this.
yeah, I think Jag lasted the longest, I think, out of anything there.
Yeah, and it describes how at the point the customers at the point it was '84, and now we're getting into the '80s. The customers became a little more well-heeled, if you will. It was one of the owners who's quoted here, Tony Serio, was one of the owners at the time. The Hamptons was changing, uh, but back then it was still a different temperature where everybody knew everybody. They had live music here, Esperanza. I mean, and these were some big, Iggy Pop, the Ramones.
Yeah, Flock of Seagulls.
These were, come on, these were big acts. I mean,
Yeah, and the people going too, I mean, there were people like Eddie Murphy, they talk about,
yeah,
so it there's the change, but still, like he says, there were no heirs.
yeah, 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 yeah. And Eddie Murphy was one, and I gotta say this because I just like to say his name. I remember this. This was Ed quotation marks Too Tall Jones. I'm a football fan. He played for the Dallas Cowboys at that era, and one of the greatest one of the greatest nicknames of all time, Too Tall.
Right.
But again, as Esperanza was saying, Flock of Seagulls was there, and wow, how about the place had a legal capacity of 250 people, but no, I can't say that this is true or not. I'm just reading what this article says, but some nights 600 or 700 people in this place,
Yeah,
Esperanza. Now,
I do remember being there and being rated.
oh, you do is okay,
Yeah, as they say, rated, right? Yeah,
right,
because it just was so crowded, and they had these doors that, you could open up like sliding doors so that
right,
you could kind of spill out, um,
right.
and it was cooler a little bit, mildly.
So
Um,
it's sort of like emptied out into the parking lot kind of thing and
well, it would
outdoors,
yeah, I mean that was toward the other side, but yeah, when the cops came, you left, obviously.
and speaking of the police, now I don't know if you remember these stories
Oh yeah.
specifically. Okay,
Well, yeah, I mean more specifically, well, you can
yeah,
talk about it, this high
mean, there
school
was
girl
apparently,
named Tracy
yeah,
Herlin.
I never
Yeah.
heard these stories before. So you knew the story of this Tracy Herlin, who apparently she was murdered at the club, or
Well, after she
um,
left the club, yeah. I don't think it was at the club,
right,
but definitely Kendall Madison
well,
was,
yeah,
oh my gosh, I mean, I still think about it, and he was a classmate of mine, and I guess he was promoting an event at Jag in 1995, and I just remember it clearly. He was, stabbed in the parking lot, and yeah, who knows what
yeah,
reason? I don't
yeah.
know any of that.
I yeah, again, I mean, I remember the name. I know he's a great athlete out here, and
Yes, yeah, yeah. The YMCA has, a space dedicated to him, and there's a foundation. Yeah, I mean, it was just a really sad, horrible, horrible
yeah,
story.
yeah, yeah, and again, the article goes on to say, and again, it's funny this article and the story of dancing and nightlife out here is sort of metaphorically, certainly coincides with what's been happening on Eastern Long Island, how celebrities used to escape to the East End to avoid the spotlight back in the day. We touched on that in the episode, with the fabulous Hamptons,
Hmm.
Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller, you know, uh,
Right. Yeah.
going to Amagansett to sort of get away from the
Yeah,
paparazzi.
you were meant to be incognito here. It wasn't to be recognized.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
but really great line in this article. I mean, I loved it how everything became a commodity as the curtains fell on the 20th century. Not
Yeah,
just
yeah.
not just real estate, but place names, bragging rights to localism, even telephone number exchanges.
Oh
Like,
God, it's such a thing. I
right,
mean, really, I still have a 516 area code. I'm
right,
sorry.
right, and the whole thing
People
of
think I live in Nassau County, but
and
it's
and you want the 324
the
versus three two
324.
nine
Yeah, yeah.
or
So
907 now is the
so
exchange
silly.
in East Hampton. Not that it matters since everyone has mobiles anyway, but apparently those things
Or if
were
you're south of the highway. I mean, that I did not grow up with that stupidity. I'm sorry. It's so just poserville.
yeah, yeah,
But it
yeah,
was interesting, we just going back to the tragedies linked with Jag. I mean, going back to that building too, and this article says, after those things happened, mid 90s, um, nothing really good seemed to happen after that. And I feel
yeah,
like between 95 and 2000, and I moved back to East Hampton in 2000, 2001, it just, there was a shift. You could still go out. There were
right,
all these clubs still. There's still quite a few, but it was already that time of, it just seemed more sorted somehow.
yeah, yeah. And it's a really it's a good segue you make here because and it's also about the Jag, how again the owner of the Jag, this Tony Serio, was quoted, the vibe was killer back then, a whole mess of wild moments and craziness. It was fun. I looked forward to going to work, but after a while it wasn't anymore.
Right. Yeah. And there was a shift. And it's, who knows? I mean, if it was, the greed is good 80s and it just finally caught up with this whole scene, I guess.
Exactly. And it goes on to say, and this is a point you brought up earlier in this episode, how the Jag might have lasted the longest of
Hmm.
all the places, and we're going to get into the history of this in a couple of minutes. But you know, he goes on to say it might have been the building's last hurrah.
Yeah.
They started to lose money. Everything started to change. The drinking changed, as he put it.
Yeah. I mean, the same thing happened with the swamp that we've talked about,
Yeah,
didn't it?
it,
It
it,
really
it, it-
coincides.
exactly. And I just want to digress backwards for a minute. They quote a Heather Wyatt in this article, who's been here for families, had a house for 3 generations, hung out when it was Diamond Lils, which is, we'll get into that. But there was employee nights and industry nights, and that
Right.
was
There
something that
used to be
was
that. Yep. I
a little
remember doing
more,
that at Oceans in Amagansett.
yes,
Hmm.
exactly. Now, this is a part of the story we want to get into for a minute because it's also a special request by Esperanza how we have to touch on this. And it's, I think she's right. Uh, there was a person named here, another cool nickname, Daddy Cool Powell. Okay.
Well, he was the DJ that would would haul all his
That's
vinyl
right. Right.
to Mellow Mouth, the
Right.
200 pounds of vinyl, and he saw an opportunity.
That's right. We're gonna bring this in here. How now this was again late 70s. In 81, they bought a roller rink called Nero's in Sag Harbor.
I love that this was a roller rink, but before that, a Grumman airplane factory. I
You
mean,
gotta
this
love
is
this, right?
just
Again, we
the
Esperanza,
story of buildings, right?
totally true. And we've mentioned this kind of thing, how one of the things we like to do on Our Hamptons podcast is transport you back. A Sag Harbor, Long Island, with a
Yeah.
Grumman
Well, I
factory.
mean, Sag Harbor was like a factory town. Think
Right.
about it. They had the Bulliva factory back in the day. They and had this Grumman airplane factory. I mean, that's incredible.
It's unbelievable. I mean, there was that again, and not ancient history, 1980,
1981. But it's funny. I think of it. It says, was a huge 10,000 square foot loft warehouse, and I'm thinking the houses are bigger nowadays.
They-
This is insane.
someone's walk-in closet is bigger than this warehouse. Okay. Um, but
But what did they make out of that space?
they turned it into a much talked about new music venue, Esperanza, called.
Bay Street. Ugh,
Unbelievable.
I mean, Bay Street. Bay Street. You could go walking down the wharf and you would. I remember walking down on the wharf and like walking by the Gypsy Kings. I was like, what?
Unbelievable.
Because they were performing, you know.
And it goes on 86 to 89. So we're now pushing outward a little bit. The club saw its heyday. Billy Joel, Simply Red, Tina Turner, Madonna, James Brown. I mean, come on.
Yeah, yeah. Sunday reggae. I saw
Sunday
Ziggy Marley
reggae.
there.
Right. Fans from all over the village, which was still less crowded then and less expensive than other hamlets. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, Big concert nights, the hotels would sell out. Just fantastic story.
Yeah. But like he says, the 90s came and it got more commercial and keyword showy. It got
Yes.
glossier, he says, right? I mean, it's what we talk
And
about.
uh, you know, and he goes on to say, to extend your point, Esperanza, after 10 years, and now 10 years is a good run,
Yeah.
okay? But, as you see so often with people in retail, when they don't own the property
Hmm.
and they're at the mercy of a lease, um, he wasn't going to be able to afford again, I guess, the new lease coming up. Place changed a lot. And he decided to close Bay Street. And as he puts it, a chapter in the party history of the Hamptons. We put Sag Harbor on the map, or so he says.
Well, I wouldn't really say that that's an overstatement.
Yeah, and it goes on in this article, and this was, I got to give props to this article in East Magazine. I mean, it was really, just tremendous, a lot of detail in here. And, the writer goes on to say things started to change, instead of art openings with bohemian painters, there were fundraisers with $10,000 tables. Publicists got in here. They touch on this. We all remember this article, the Lizzie Grubman.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I
Well, she
mean,
was a publicist. There you go. I mean,
exactly.
it was
And
about again being seen, getting publicity.
and again, and I like the way the writer puts it. It was one of the most notorious pivot points, and it was. We all remember this. To Lizzie Grubman basically out had a fight with a bouncer at Conscience Point nightclub, another place that's gone, Esperanza.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Threw her SUV into reverse and backed into the crowd, injuring people. The whole beginning. It was became a whole storyline. And again, metaphorically, a lot about what was happening.
Yeah, a lot about the entitlement, you mean?
Yeah. uh,
Laura Piano loafers. I mean, the
right,
bottle of rosé. It's just
right.
such a cliche.
The
Ah,
stereotypes, exactly.
oh,
And
and the dancing. Bye bye. It was
Es-
not about dancing. It was just about going to the club and standing around
Esperanza, I got to take that segue you just handed me on a silver platter, like you often do, because you
on
anticipate
on a
me.
cocktail tray.
I want to thank you for that, but it has to be touched on because this article, one of the where she closes this segment of the article, is the Esperanza Leon lament. Dancing, for the most part, died. The East End seems to have developed an inverse relationship. God, Esperanza, you could have written this line, between having money and having nightlife fun, where sadly you can't have one without a whole lot of the other.
Totally. Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah. I mean,
wow.
honestly, I can tell. It's like it brings back the vision of, oh, Pink Elephant in Southampton. Everybody, the hot spot, the hot spot. We went one night and it was really the worst dive bar, honestly. It was not anything fancy.
Right,
All these people just standing around, terrible music, and
right,
you had to pay, for this stupid bottle service, which was
right.
incredibly expensive. I mean, you couldn't sit down without that.
Yeah,
Or you couldn't
it's
be there without that, really. It's oh, anyway.
so I think we should start wrapping up Esperanza.
Yes, yes.
And but we really should try to cover, we're going to do this again. This could be an episode unto itself, but we're going to just give our audience a background of the building itself, 44
Of
Three Mile
44 Three
Harbor
Mile
Road,
Harbor Road. Yeah,
of the
yeah,
Mellow Mouth, in which we touched on, and Jags, but it had a life all its own, dating
yeah.
back
This,
from the 1910s.
yeah, if not earlier, truly,
Yeah,
because it was like a barn. It honestly is it's a barn.
completely true.
Yeah.
Completely true. And like they say, the article goes on to say, whether it was once was a potato barn, they don't know. It's possible, but the 1910s saw Perry White. Now that we're not talking about the inspector on Superman. We're talking about, uh, he was known around town as a waiter at the inn later known as the Maidstone Arms. He was the proprietor. He opened this grocery store for his son to run, which went into the 1920s when it went out of business. And it was then the first roadside restaurant opens, Esperanza. And gotta love some of these things. The Roma's Inn opens its doors. Esperanza, to your point, 1930s, it was a year round dance and dine.
Yep. A
Night
night
spot.
spot. I mean, yeah, people knew how to party, I'm telling you.
I'm telling you, Esperanza, you might have been born in the wrong era,
I have a feeling.
you
Yeah.
know? But anyway, Alma's Tavern followed in 1938, quotation marks, their food, chow mein and chop suey, a specialty. Um, Live music from Stellar's Greenpoint Band, a bowling alley.
Oh
The
yeah, that's
19
right. It had a bowling alley. I
yeah,
remember hearing about the bowling
wow.
alley.
Okay, I mean in the 1940s, Palmer's had held servicemen's night. Huge crowds of Navy and Air Force men were given free sandwiches, cakes, pies, beer. Around 1943, Peter Fetty, name sounds familiar. That's a
Yeah,
familiar name.
Well, he owned the grocery store, I think, on Shelter
Exactly.
Island. No?
And he owned commercial property on nearby North Main Street, buys the building, and opens Fetty's Tavern, pizza pies, soft shell crabs, steaks, and fine foods. And after dark, Don Reutershan, we very familiar Eastern Long Island name, and his orchestra serenaded the diners. Wow, what a story this is. My gosh, 48, a pair of brothers started managing the club. Pete's Tavern, still owned by Fetty, at the time. The Harbor Club opened its doors in the 1950s, 3 nights a week of dancing, Esperanza, to the Bob Ellis Trio.
Direct
Gosh.
from the Hotel Plaza. I mean, this was not,
Yeah, it's
good
incredible.
entertainment. Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, 1960s, there's a supper club. A realtor named Joseph Luciano opens Fontana Donate, an Italian restaurant offering after theater dinner specials in the Fountain Lodge. Closed it in 67 when a club called the Laughing Stock took its place.
Huh.
Beatnik evenings of poetry readings, Esperanza.
And Paco's Paella.
I mean, come on. Esperanza, this was nightlife. Now,
And very diverse and varied.
yes, I was thinking that. I mean, the
I mean, I don't know
diversity.
about the crowd being diverse, but definitely the offerings from Chinese food to Paco's Paella, from chop suey
Wow.
to Paco's Paella over the course of, a few decades. Yeah.
I mean, come
And
on.
pizza.
Yeah. I mean, 71. I mean, look at the history of this building. It's
Yeah, yeah. I
extraordinary.
mean, it makes you wonder back in the 40s, 50s, did the likes of, all these Abex artists go to these places? I mean, I'm
Yeah,
picturing Jackson Pollock having frequented these
you would
bars.
think we didn't when we did an episode, a podcast on that era. We didn't really mention any of that, but good point. I really wonder. So now we're getting into the 1970s, and we really do. Thankfully, we're getting close to wrapping up because we could go on this for forever. Richard Polo opened a night spot called Polo with Esperanza with a distinct group house single slant.
And there go
After
this. Yeah, that starts in the 70s, right?
that's right.
Yeah.
After a hard, and again, just came off an episode talking about share houses and everything
Yep.
else.
Yep. For the
After
groupers,
for the groupers, after a hard day at the beach, apparently the groupers should come to Polo. Bring your whole house. Oh my gosh. Unbelievable. 73 bought Patricia Fabry Smith, a circus performer, an impresario of popular women's bars in Manhattan and Provincetown. We all know what's coming now. This became, obviously, it was a gay bar vibe inside here. Ads tout in the Star touted the only female chef in the Hamptons. 76 was when brought the Mellow Mouth Club, which began as the Mellow Mouth Nice Cream Parlor in Amagansett,
Terrific.
but they opened. You remember the logo, the red lips, right,
Yeah.
Esperanza?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, look at this Tuesday night singles, backgammon, rap sessions, and dancing. And again, the weekend afternoons of teen discos. Wow. The 80s, the disco nights. It was a club called Hurrah. Then it became the Jag, a little less disco, a little more new wave. We went over this with some live performers.
Yeah. I remember Lobster a Go-Go in the
Okay.
80s. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. The 90s, Lil's Restaurant was there. The Machetta family, who owned the property since the 70s, opened Christie's. And then things calmed down until Danceteria, which you remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. 98, excuse me, Sylvan Realty, who I believe owns the building now.
Currently.
And then NV Tsunami
Yeah.
came
And
into
that was
Polo.
it. I
That
mean,
was
sorry,
now we're
anything
getting
after
into
Envy
yeah,
has just
now we're
been
getting into, yeah, these people. It was Sean Puffy Combs, Billy Joel, Donald Trump. I saw a
Mhm.
picture of Donald Trump at NV Tsunami. This was 20 years ago, but the 2010s, clubs with expensive bottle service, celebrities, Lily Pond, SL East, Finale, Club Philippe. Really weirdly then became that co-working space, the Spur, for about
Right,
5 years.
right. And then
Remember?
more recently, like a Turkish restaurant. So,
Exactly. And that's where,
unfortunately, we know what's happening. At the time this article was written, there was no sort of true, determination, but this building is soon to be gone and turned into a brand spanking new retail office, a little bit of housing building.
yet again, a somber end to a story about disco dancing.
The
But
death
yes,
of disco. Yeah.
that, this, well, hey, Esperanza, I think I got to bring in that Talking Head song. This ain't no party. This ain't no disco.
Disco. Yeah.
This ain't no fooling around. But I think that's probably as good a place to stop as any,
Yeah.
Esperanza. And,
Yeah. So
so that was a
yeah,
lot of terror.
next time we drive by 44 3 Mile Harbor Road, just remember all of this. Think
I,
about all of this.
I will, Esperanza. And thank you for this journey.
It was so much fun. And thank you to East Magazine. This was a really good article.
Tremendous
Thank you,
article
Bess Rattray, and to the writer of the article, Stephanie Krikorian. It
Yes,
was,
from
yeah. And
2013. We encourage our audience. I mean, go back.
East is great. East
East is a
Magazine.
phenomenal publication, really
Totally aligned with, what we do as well.
totally, and really punches above its weight. I mean,
Yeah.
just tremendous.
Yeah.
Thank you, Esperanza.
Thanks, Arwen. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
Let's
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.